Hey, Husker fans, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson, and joining me as always is Danny Gillette, and we're back for another episode of the podcast here on Monday as we get set for Nebraska spring football. The basketball transfer portal is now officially open today, and we're also going to debate about Nebraska basketball and what actually can be successful about that program. After that question was raised by some fans this weekend, and also a tremendous weekend for Nebraska wrestling, showing that you can a men's program can compete for a national championship, even though they took second, but brought home some national champions and the best finish that the Huskers have ever had. So we're going to touch on all of that. Before we do, please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, get into the comment section. And Danny, how are you on this Monday morning?
We might get to this a little bit later, but I was watching March Madness, so I had a busy weekend of watching basketball, and boy, seeing all those Nebraska targets and transfers in March Madness kind of hurt.
Yeah, it did a little bit. And yeah, we will get into that. It's been a hot topic of conversation, with the basketball program and everything. So yeah, we'll definitely get into that. As I don't know if people saw, but Corn Nation had an interesting tweet on social media basically asking, if you care about Nebraska basketball or if Nebraska basketball should care. So maybe let's just start. Let's just get into it. I
Yeah,
was going to
okay.
start with spring football, but screw it. Let's start with basketball. Because yeah, it just was really interesting, this kind of debate that Corn Nation put out there, and maybe we can pull up the tweet basically to give you a better idea of what we're talking about. But essentially, there's been a huge debate of what the ceiling is for Nebraska basketball, or what can be kind of achieved with Nebraska basketball. And after some other teams won games, McNeese State I think won a tournament game on Thursday, and that kind of triggered this, I think. And it was a serious question from Quizzes Coordination on a Friday: how many of you really care about Nebraska, about this? And it's Nebraska not making the NCAA tournament ever. I realize Nebraska wants to compete in every sport, but is that reality in the current landscape? Why would we bother pumping money into this sport when we have so many others that are more successful? And that was talking about basketball. So what are your thoughts about that, Danny? I mean, should Nebraska continue to try to invest in basketball? I know that last year it's been reported they had about $2.5 million in NIL, which was the bottom tier of the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And now it's also being reported that it's every starter is basically going to cost $500,000. So, is Nebraska even going to have the NIL money to really field a competitive team? I mean, those are some debates, but what are your thoughts on this idea that Nebraska shouldn't invest in men's basketball anymore?
It's a dumbass take. I'm sorry. It's a dumb take. And I mean, I know the program hasn't been strong in recent memory. And look, I know that the program's not where anybody wants it to be, right? But Nebraska basketball is still is still one of the top three sports by revenue. They turned a profit last season with a surplus of almost $5 million, and people do care about Nebraska basketball. Um, you know, I don't want to speak too badly about coordination, but he's very anti men's basketball, so that also kind of didn't surprise me that he had this take, and others did as well. It's not just him, but I think it's a stupid debate. I do think there needs to be more of an investment in the basketball program, but I don't think that it's Fred Hoiberg's fault that this program doesn't invest, and he I feel like he's doing what he can with the budget that he has. I understand there were some portal misses, but when you look at the budget of Nebraska basketball in comparison to some other schools, Fred doesn't have a ton to work with. I still think Nebraska was in the bottom tier in terms of revenue for basketball. So, um, and now we have UCLA and Oregon, who also looks pretty good. It was just one of those times where we caught Oregon at a bad time, I guess, back in early February. But anyway, I think especially with these new teams coming in, Nebraska basketball is still at the bottom in terms of revenue, and I think Fred's doing the best he can with the budget that he has, and I do think it's worth investing more into the program. I don't think I don't think taking away revenue from basketball and investing it somewhere else is going to necessarily be a good thing. I mean, the only program right now where I could see really heavily investing in is wrestling, and I wonder how far that's going to go. I mean, I would say baseball, but baseball is also on a downward skid. So I don't know. I just thought this was a stupid debate. I don't think you should take any money or fold any program and invest it into somewhere else. Um, this was one of the more interesting debates I saw this week, and it just shows that we are so deep in the off season that we need some form of content to keep us all relevant.
Yeah, well, I just think that to me it's silly to try to sacrifice any sport for another. I think Nebraska should have the resources to be competitive in all of the, main. I mean, you look at there's four men's sports that I would say really truly, matter, the main four. Obviously you have basketball, football, baseball, and wrestling. And then women's sports, you have volleyball, women's basketball, and softball. And maybe someday that there, I mean, there is girls wrestling. So I mean that may potentially be a sport that Nebraska could add at some point, excuse me, in the future. Maybe hockey could be added to. I don't, but for now,
If hockey was added. Hockey would be so cool.
yeah, that would be cool. And you could add women's hockey too as well.
Yeah.
But at any rate, those are the big seven sports. And if you look at it, I mean, Nebraska's had a decent amount of success, and that honestly, the one that's had the least amount of success probably is the football program. I mean, I know basketball struggled, but they did make the NCAA tournament last season. So
Yeah.
I mean, let's not forget about that. And then the baseball team won the Big Ten tournament last year. The wrestling team obviously just went on an incredible run where they took second and crowned two national champions, something they haven't done in 14 years. They've never taken second place. And they have 6 of those guys coming back next year. So they should have a good chance to be, right in the thick of it again. And then you look at women's basketball's made the tournament 2 years in a row. Volleyball team obviously is one of the best. Softball in the top 25. They've consistently made the NCAA tournament for the most part. So I feel like, Nebraska's best programs are all pretty successful. And, so to me, I mean, looking at the basketball team, like I know they struggled this year, but the Big Ten Conference, I mean, let's just call it like it is. It was really damn good. I mean, they went, 12-4 in the first 2 days of the tournament. So, Nebraska, like they were very close to still being in the NCAA tournament, but had a couple of bounces go their way. And, if they hit on a few different transfer portal guys, I mean, they just with some of the guys it just did not really hit last year. Berkey still kind of up in the air, see what his future can be. Braxton wasn't who Nebraska thought he was going to be. Raleigh Wooster ended up being a disappointment. Gavin Griffiths was a major disappointment. He was one of the biggest disappointments in the entire class. So I mean, that's just going to happen year to year. I think it is going to be important for Nebraska to have more money because you look at Indiana's going to be searching, Kansas is going to be out to pay players. Everybody's going to have more money, and they need to probably triple the NIL budget from last year. There's been some early guys that Nebraska's been in contact with, but like Josh Dix, are they going to be able to get him? Probably not, because it's going to probably cost like $2 million just to get him. So, I mean, that's just the reality of college basketball. And so it's like, I don't know, if you think that Nebraska could do better with somebody besides Fred Hoiberg, and everything that they're up against, like, I just don't think that that's the reality of the situation. I think Fred's doing a great job. It's going to be an interesting week this week, and I think they're probably going to be, out seeing some guys recruiting. But yeah, I think the whole premise is kind of ridiculous that Nebraska, just because they haven't been competitive, you would just shut down that program. Like that's mind-boggling to me that you could be a Nebraska fan site and actually like advocate for one of the main sports to just like not be invested. So I just don't understand that take at all. I'm going to unmute you there, Danny. No, you're muted.
There we go. There we go. And let's be real here. Nebraska's also up against Creighton. It's very hard to say no to Creighton. When you look, I was watching their opening game against Louisville, and to me, that's the exact type of offense that Fred Hoiberg wants to run. They were draining threes all game in the opener against Louisville, and ultimately they got stopped by a very good team in Auburn. But at the end of the day, they played really well. And, when you look at that offensive system that Creighton has and how well they execute it and how good they are at shooting the basketball, it's hard to say no to that. And it's an already solidly built foundation. Some transfer portal guys, some returners. And so, having Creighton in the state also makes things difficult because Creighton has the NIL money for basketball, and they've been a much more successful team. So, I mean, that's also working against Nebraska as well to a point.
Yeah, I definitely think that's working against Nebraska. And one thing you have to think about too with Creighton is, and this I think is probably where coordination is probably coming from a little bit with this is that, some of these programs like Creighton doesn't have a football program, right? So they can put all of their resources in NIL into their basketball program because they don't have to spend on that. And so they're not,
Right.
there's other teams like that too, Marquette. I guess you could maybe UConn doesn't really have that because they do have a football team. It's just not like a major program, but
St.
there's
John's.
yeah, St. John's. There's plenty of other ones, but
Yeah.
I mean, where are all the Big East teams at right now? Most of them are sitting at home, as far as I know. I mean, I'm trying to think. St. John's got beat, Creighton got beat,
Yeah.
UConn got beat. So I don't think that there's any. I mean, there might be a team. I just haven't studied it that closely, but so I don't know. I mean, the Big East teams have spent a ton in NIL and not really gotten a whole heck of a lot out of it the past 2 seasons. So I mean, it does go both
UConn
ways.
did. I mean, to be fair.
Well, yeah, UConn did. Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, but like a lot of the other ones that did, Marquette, Creighton, Georgetown, all the other private schools, they didn't do a whole lot. So, NIL is not the only way that you can win, but it is going to be, it is going to be difficult for Nebraska getting in on some of these debates. And that's where having a guy, I think, like Fred Hoiberg, who can identify talent, coach kids up, and do, some of those extra things, I think is really going to matter because, there's just some teams are going to have more talent than Nebraska, and that's probably always going to be the case, and probably going to get worse before it gets better, in terms of the division of talent in college basketball. But yeah, I think they have to get the right players, and they have to have the money to get the right players. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to get superstar NBA draft picks, but they have to have enough money to go win some of these recruiting battles, and we'll see if that takes place over the next couple of weeks because, yeah, you got the crown starting next Monday. But the more important thing for this team is, the roster building that's going to take place before that. And so I'm sure we'll see Fred Hoiberg and some guys out on visits. But, yeah, at the end of the day, I don't think it really works that way either. I don't know that you can just say, like, hey, we're going to take $3 million from, basketball and give it to the baseball team this year. I mean, just for the way university budgets and things work. I mean, I just think it's kind of a simplistic idea, and to me, it just doesn't make sense. Nebraska has the resources to win in every sport. So I reject that argument wholeheartedly.
If you were starting a new basketball program, or we didn't have one, and the university wanted to start one, then this, I think, would be a better debate. But for now, I don't really understand it at all.
Yeah, I don't either. So at any rate, let's switch topics there. I just wanted to, while we're on this, it was interesting and it was cool to see, the wrestling team have such a great weekend and show that you can compete for national championships at Nebraska, which I do think is the case. Especially, football can get there. I think there's a long way to go for basketball, but the program can, win games in the national tournament. That's got to be the first step. But they were close, and but it was awesome to see Mark Manning's team, perform the way they did. Mark Manning was National Coach of the Year. Nebraska got second with 117 points. Penn State ran away with the national title as expected, but to beat teams like Oklahoma State, a national powerhouse, and ran past Iowa in the point standings. So a pretty great weekend for Nebraska. And like I said, 6 of those 8 guys are coming back or have eligibility remaining. So should be another good season. And one of those guys is Antrell Taylor from Millard South, who just won a national championship and has a chance to win a couple of more. So it's exciting time for Nebraska wrestling, and it's a reminder that the Huskers can compete on a national level in a big men's sport.
Yeah, it was really fun to watch this weekend, and you look at what they were able to do this season, and you talk about a tough basketball conference, the Big Ten, but it's also a really, really, really good wrestling conference. So I think this sets the stage for big things moving forward from Mark Manning, obviously Coach of the Year, like you said, and he's really been able to, stabilize the program, and the program has a vision on how to go forward and a blueprint for how to find that success. And we kind of tied it in with basketball here. I think, when you look at, is this team better off than it was, X amount of years ago? For wrestling, I think yes, because now they have the blueprint and now they know what they need to do in order to, contend with the top teams in the conference. So shout out to Mark Manning and the wrestling team. They had a great weekend overall, and I'm really excited to see what they can do moving forward. And I love watching wrestling, so it's gonna be fun seasons for the next few years.
Yeah, and it was cool. Antrell Taylor, only the second Nebraska native to win a national championship. Nebraska's previous best finish as a team was third back in 1993 with 79.5 points. So truly, by far, the best wrestling performance Nebraska's ever had, and it seems like there's a good chance to maybe repeat this next year. So if you're not paying attention to the wrestling team, you should start doing that going forward. But this week, obviously, it's going to be about spring practice, and we meant to kind of start the show here, got here in a roundabout way, but on Monday, Nebraska is starting spring ball. Now, I'm not sure if you've come across this, but like I've had a couple of pre-spring articles, storylines, position battles, and stuff, and then I even had a little video I put out, just like Dylan Raiola, like, oh, I'm waiting for spring ball, and it's really crazy. A lot of the comments I get are, well, Nebraska's not having a spring game this year. Nebraska's not having a spring
Oh,
game,
I've
but
seen those. Yeah.
like duh people, but you do realize that spring ball is not one game. Like
No, they don't.
I need to
They don't.
explain, like, Nebraska people, you do realize that, right? There's like 15 practices, and those practices mean a lot more than the silly scrimmage that we see on Saturday. Like, I get that's fun to watch it, but like more is done and more like happened, like the depth chart and position battles. A
Yeah.
lot more important stuff happens during practice than the stuff that we see on the field during that spring game, which I mean, yeah, we saw Dylan Raiola for like 60 minutes last year. Like, that's not the reason he won the starting job. He did it in spring. So like, it drives me crazy a little bit.
Well, you have the camp that thinks, is just so mad that there's no spring game that they don't even care about spring practices. And then you have the camp that thinks spring ball is the spring game and who are genuinely confused. So you have those two groupings. And quite honestly, the spring game, in terms of the big picture of spring practices, is the most meaningless part of them all. And so yeah, I don't want to go into this tangent again. It's too early to have two angry heart attacks, but yeah, um, it's really interesting to kind of see this negative reaction about the spring, about the lack of a spring game. I'd say.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, and that people don't, it's like the All-Star games are like the Senior Bowl. The practice is more important than the actual game, and I feel like that about spring ball. So, at any rate, there is a lot to talk about, I think. We have talked a little bit about some position battles. There's not like a ton. An offense quarterback is set. Obviously, we know the running back, but I think like running back too is a really interesting position battle. I
Mm-hmm.
think receiver is kind of. I think we know who's going to play at receiver. Obviously, like Dane Keene, Isaiah Hunter. I think Hardly Gilmore, barring I think Cortez Mills. I think that's going to be like your top five. How is that exactly going to shake out after? I think Key and Hunter are going to be your top two. So I think it's interesting there. Tight end. I don't know. I mean, I think you've got Lindenmeyer and Harburg, and I think those are going to be the guys. I don't know if there's really that much of a competition to see like who's going to be the number one. Yeah, I think that Harburg's going to be the number one pass threat, and that
Yeah,
Lindenmeyer's going to play the role that he played last year.
Harburg's been impressing from what I've heard. So
Yeah, he's a good athlete. He's always been a good athlete, and he's had some moments at tight end. He looked pretty good catching that pass against Minnesota a couple years ago, and like I said, I think he can
I
be a
remember
good
that. Yeah.
blocker. So yeah, he needs that time to work on his technique, and I'm glad he's finally getting that. But I guess offensively, the most interesting battle to me is going to be on the offensive line, which is also interesting because a bunch of the guys that are going to be in that battle aren't going to be available. Like
Yeah.
Gunnar Gatula, Turner, Corcoran, Teddy Prohashka won't be out there. Henry Loftoski is limited, and there's been some chatter about him playing offensive tackle. So that's going to be, interesting if he can work his way into the mix there. Because I thought maybe he would be starting at guard again, and maybe he still could if he doesn't win the tackle job. So there's a lot. I feel like there's a lot of moving parts. Like if Gibson Pyle, proves like he's a starting caliber player, or if Sam Sledge or Grant Bricks or Liptoski, there's a lot of competition, which I think is a good thing. I think Nebraska has
Yeah.
actually quality depth on the offensive line for the first time probably since Matt Rule's been here.
Yeah, and guys like Grant Bricks and Gibson Pyle, I'm really interested to see what they make of this spring, because they came in as highly regarded recruits, and by all accounts, they're very good linemen. From what I've seen, they're very talented, very sturdy, very physical linemen, and I just hate to see the injuries. The injuries to Teddy, in the injuries to, uh, Turner and, guys like that, just because I feel like those two in particular, Teddy and Turner, kind of needed to be healthy this spring because now they have depth to where they can get pushed out. And when you look at some of these battles, I agree with you. Offensive line is extremely important because it seems like there hasn't been consistency on the offensive line in, I don't know, 5 years, 7 years. So, I mean, it seems like there's always something with the offensive line. And I think this is a good opportunity for the younger guys to really step up and, make a name for themselves. And for the older, more veteran guys to get healthy and, let's be honest here, try to retain their spot because the young boys are moving on up. And I think now we're at the point where, if you're healthy, you're good, and you see the field, then the job is yours.
Yeah, and I mean, you've got the 105-man roster limit too,
Yep.
and I'm not sure how exactly that's going to factor into it with guys like Corcoran and Prohashka, and so that's going to be really interesting. I mean, Brock Knutson's another guy that has been
Yeah.
mentioned. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how that offensive line depth chart shakes out this spring and how that changes going into the fall and what the roster looks like going into the fall. If all those, I mean, yeah, if you can find a way to get Turner Corcoran and Teddy Prohashka on this roster, that would be great because they've got starting experience, if they're healthy. But if you have to make a decision and you don't know if they're going to be able to play on the field, like I'm not sure if you keep them on the roster. So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. And I guess I'm glad I'm not the one that has to make those decisions and tell those
Yeah.
guys what those decisions are. That's got to probably be the toughest part of Matt's
Yeah.
rules job. And it's only going to get tougher, but I feel like this is probably going to be the toughest year. I feel like after this, it's going to be just more set in stone what the roster is. And he said he was up front with players. So I think they all know what they had to do. And I think the guys who are on the bubble, like definitely know that they're on the bubble and they made the choice to be here. So, and I'm not saying I have no idea who that is. I'm just looking at the roster and kind of
Right.
feeling it out. But yeah, it will be interesting. And I'm very interested to hear about some of the newcomers and how they've done. I think defensive line's another position, not really like, again, a defensive line is different than an offensive line where all the guys are going to play, but who's going to be the starting, who's going to be the starting three up front? I personally think it's going to be Van Poppel, Keanu Davis, and oh shoot, I'm totally losing it now. Probably
Elijah
Elijah.
Judy?
Yeah, Elijah Judy. Yeah, and then I think Williams Noweri and Jalen George and then Cam Leonard are going to be the other guys that play quite a bit. I think we'll see
Yep.
Cam Leonard a lot on pass rushing situations, kind of like his freshman season. And so yeah, I think if they stick with a 6-man or a 3-man front, whether that be a 3-4 or a 3-3-5, I think those are the 6 guys you're going to see. Outside of pass rush situations, those are the 6 guys you're going to see the most on the defensive line, which I feel pretty good about.
Yeah, no, that's a really good defensive line, especially when you look at Van Poppel's growth and how much weight he's put on. And I think you make a really good point about Leonard's freshman season because I feel like last year he was kind of out of position in a sense. Like he's a pure pass rusher in my opinion. He's a pass rusher. That's what he does, and I feel like that's how he made an impact his freshman season last year. I felt like he was almost not given too much, and not even that he tried to do too much, but it just wasn't a good fit for him defensively. And so if he could get back to like a pure like pass rusher role or get in there for pass rushing situations, I feel like that could benefit him greatly.
And then you do have obviously Dason McCullough is going to be, one of the top pass rushers at the jack position. I think
Mm-hmm.
Willis McGahee is also going to be in the
Yep.
mix there. So,
That sounds
and
really
then
nice.
even Dawson Merritt too could be in the mix as well. So,
Shavers,
I
probably. Yeah.
yeah, Shavers will be obviously starting inside,
Yeah.
but he proved last year he can blitz too and do some other things. So, but yeah, I mean the inside linebacker positions, or just you look at McCullough's going to be Jack, and then your 2 inside spots probably Javin Wright and Vincent Shavers starting, but then you've
Good.
also still
Yeah.
got Marcus Watson Trent that
Yep.
they added, Christian Jones. So I feel like they're really deep at the linebacker spot. Dylan Rogers too, and don't forget
Yeah.
about him.
Yeah.
And then also the secondary, I think, is some interesting safety. I think they're pretty much set with Buford. I mean, yeah, Marcus Buford, Hartzog, and Singleton. I think those are going to be like essentially your 3 safeties. But at cornerback, it's going to be really interesting because you've got Donovan Jones. Saya Wright obviously is going to be the starter, and then Jones started the bowl game. You've got Andrew Marshall who came in here. So I think that's just going to be really, you've got Amir Hall still, coming back, and
Yep.
then you've got some other guys too. Tarver,
Jameer
Amari
Khan.
Sanders, Jameer Khan. So a lot of guys to compete at that cornerback position, and that's even without they had that Groves Killebrew, and he left.
Yep.
So the room would have been, maybe I can see why he left, because the
Yeah.
cornerback room is pretty loaded right now. I think there's guys to prove themselves, but Jones, if he can play the way he did against Boston College, and you have Andrew Marshall, who was first team All Big Sky last year, I feel like this secondary, just the defense as a whole, I don't think it's going to have a very big drop off from last season. They might be just as good as they were last year, honestly.
I hope they're better, because last year, even though they were good, it was just kind of in some spots. But Groves Killebrew probably saw this and was like, "Yeah, I'm all set," and I don't blame him. I don't blame him. But one of the things I'm really looking forward to seeing, and I know I kind of gave him a hard time last year, but this really wasn't his fault in retrospect, is Buford just playing the safety position, no corner, just focusing on safety, and that's it. Because I feel like he has a little bit, better, downfield athleticism, and I feel like he's more naturally suited for the safety position. I feel like corner was a position where he really struggled last year, and he had to play that position, almost out of necessity after the injuries to Tommy Hill at the time. So I'm happy to see him kind of shift back to that safety position, and I think it's a position that's going to be more natural for him.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's better at that spot. You also have his younger brother, Mario Buford, who could be in the
Yeah.
mix. Justin Rhett, a transfer from Georgia, is another guy. Also, Caleb Benning, Ramir Stewart. So there's a lot of talented guys in this secondary, and I feel good about where they're at. I know some fans have questions about John Butler, but and rightfully so. I mean, he only had the one season, I guess, with Penn State where he was a college defensive coordinator. But I think he's going to be. I think he's going to do a better job. And I think third down defense, which was a weakness, a real weakness under Tony White both years. I mean, how many times would
Yeah.
Nebraska get the other team to like 3rd and 11, and then they're like,
Yeah.
oh great, and then they would pick it up like
Yeah.
just too often. And I think that John Butler, with that NFL background, and his pass defenses were really good. He was like the pass defensive coordinator for the Bills, so
Yep.
he had a huge part in that. And I think you will see the pass defense is going to be a lot better, especially on third down this year.
And I feel like we might be able to find a pure pass rusher this year, like a go-to pass rusher. That's something that we also have struggled with, not just under Tony White, but just in general, like over the past 5 seasons. But I feel like we'll be able to find a pure pass rushing attack this year. It's not going to be, where the offensive line can just block us back and the quarterback can read a book in the pocket. I think they're going to be more aggressive. And I think that's something that we can look forward to with a John Butler defense as well. So I have hope for John Butler. And I know it's only one game, but the Pinstripe Bowl definitely showed me a lot in terms of what he could do with the delayed blitzes and things like that.
And I think you saw some good things from like the guys we've mentioned, Judy, Keanu Davis, Van Poppel. They all played well in those games. So I feel like, they if Nebraska could get another a 330 pounder or another pass rusher, they might do it. But overall, I think with McCullough, with McGahee, Leonard, Noweri, Jalen George, I think they've got a pretty good pass rush going into next season. And I mean, you look at some of the young guys too that could kind of step up into that role, and Williams Noweri is another guy that could really,
Yep.
He's truly an X factor, because he had like 1 sack last year, and I don't know if he'll be a starter this year, but I think he's obviously going to play a lot, and if they could reach that potential, I mean, he could be starting. I mean, he could be their best pass rusher. He's got all the potential in the world, and so if you want to talk about X factors for Nebraska this season, Noweri is definitely one for me, because I think he really could have a bigger impact than maybe we're expecting.
The Florida guys, Shavers and McGahee, are the X factors for me so far, just because we saw what they could do a little bit last season. I mean, just the way they rushed the passer in the Pinstripe Bowl was impressive to me. And if they can play like that the entire season, then we got something special. And one of the guys I'm kind of interested in just to see what he can do is Gabe Moore. Now, whether he can develop just a spring ball and then we'll see what happens during the season, or whether he leaves a positive impression on the coaches and he works his way into the rotation on defensive line. That remains to be seen. But I'm really interested to see how they how they work with him on his development, because I think Terry Braden is a very good defensive line coach, and maybe he can get more to where Moore will be able to contribute sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and Gabe Moore, I'll admit that I kind of forgot about him, but he is somebody that actually I'm pretty excited about. Just
Yeah,
where he came in, where his body's at now. He's a pretty athletic dude for 290 pounds, and
yeah,
he was going to be on the two deep for Mississippi State last year, and just had some injuries and stuff. So, kind of a forgotten name, but could be one that we learn a lot more about as the season goes on.
for sure. I am definitely excited for him, and it's just added depth on the defensive line.
And another thing I'm interested in, Sean Callahan and others have talked about Dylan Raiola's weight being down, but Callahan reported on Monday he expects him about 220 pounds for Dylan Raiola, which I think would be spectacular. I think last year he
Yeah.
probably was closer to 230 and 240.
Mm-hmm.
And Matt Rule even made the comment, it's hard to be
Yeah.
a great quarterback at 240 pounds. And
Yeah.
it is. It is.
Yeah.
And we saw some of that last year with Dylan. I'm glad that he's attacked that and got his body back to a healthier weight. I think just a healthier weight for him to move around and be agile in the pocket. So if he can do that, and even not just even as a runner, but if he can just buy himself more time, because it seemed like last year there was a number of times where he just kind of got happy feet in the pocket, and I think just being in better shape will help him move around, have more of that Tom Brady kind of dip and dodge effect in the pocket, which we didn't really see much from him last year.
And, it could be something as simple as gaining the freshman 15, because I gained the freshman 15, but I'm not an athletic freak like Dylan Raiola, so it obviously had different effects for me. But, just adjusting to that sort of this is one of those things where it's not necessarily even just a sports thing, but just adjusting to college life and, eating properly and, making sure you take care of your body better. It's tough your freshman year. I certainly didn't. And so having that extra year in college, just from a life standpoint and kind of regulating your body, regulating your diet, making sure what you eat, and having another, chance at spring ball under your belt is really important for him. So I'm expecting that he'll do some really big things this year and continue to make progress with his weight. I know some fans are really kind of like, "Oh my God, he weighed that much." Well, yeah, I'm not surprised. He was adjusting to a new environment, adjusting, to a new situation and stuff like that. So, I'm really excited to see what he can do this year, especially as he continues to lose the weight.
And spring ball, we'll monitor that going forward. There'll be, I'm sure, plenty of rumblings, so we'll be covering that in depth as we move forward. But I want to wrap up the show with the transfer portal stuff. As the basketball transfer portal does open today, which, like we talked about, it's going to be interesting for Fred Hoiberg and company as they have the crown starting next week. Of course, you still have 16 teams playing in the NCAA tournament as well, so it sets up well for teams like Kansas and Indiana that aren't in the tournament right now and that have a lot of money to spend. But here's an interesting update from Robin Washut of Husker Online that he posted on Sunday night, talking about some of the targets for Nebraska, and that there's been some names kind of reported that Nebraska had interest. Brandon Walker from Montana State, Brian Etumnu from Merrimack, and Jaden Henley from UNLV. And Robin reports that Nebraska is actually not interested in those teams, that has come from the agents of those players, but that Nebraska is actually not interested in any of those prospects. So just wanted to pass that along. The only prospects at this point that they're kind of have confirmed interest in are Josh Dix and Price Sanford of Iowa, and then also a 6'11" big from Georgetown, Drew Fielder, 6'11", 235, average 7 points and 5.4 rebounds. So that's another name on the radar. I think there'll probably be some more that come up today. Last year, I remember they went and visited Andrew Morgan early. He was one of the early targets. So I think it wouldn't surprise me if Fred and the assistant coaches, made a visit to a big guy like that, or, if they made a stop to Price Sanford in Iowa. I'm sure they want to see Josh Dix, but like I said, I just feel like that one's going to be a tough one to get. Sanford probably too, but Josh, Dix averaged 14 points a game last year and shot 42% from three. So
he would fit great in this offense, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he'd be a great replacement for Bryce Williams. Those two would be perfect. Not perfect, in the sense that they're, you could be a little better defensively, but in terms of replacing Bryce and Juwan Gary, you could do a lot worse than Sanford and Josh Dix.
But like you said, I think they're going to be hard to get. I think they're going to come with a big price tag, and like we talked about earlier, how much is Nebraska basketball willing to invest? I think that ultimately is going to be the question. And but yeah, those two would be absolutely great fits for this offense. And again, just watching how Creighton ran theirs and how well they shot the three, and how well they spaced the floor and things like that. I mean, I think that's the type of offense that Fred wants to run. So I'm hoping he can get more 3-point shooters. Not that he's not tried, because it's hard to do, right? But just watching the Creighton games, it's just night and day in comparison to Nebraska.
Yeah, getting Rick Mass back will help, and then
Yep.
like, is Berkey gonna stay? The two guys I'm wondering about if they'll potentially transfer are Gavin Griffiths and Berkey. Like, I don't think so. I think Berkey will probably stay, but you just never know. And Gavin Griffiths could leave just because he didn't find much of a role last season. So I think there's like 4 spots available right now. The way I look at it, you need a guard like a Bryce Williams scoring type. You need a wing like a Jawan Gary, and then you need a big guy, and you need a point guard. That's where I look at Nebraska's transfer class right now. They need to get and honestly, like, I don't care if the point guard can score. They need somebody at that position that's a threat offensively. And Raleigh Wooster just wasn't this year, which, I mean, that we kind of expected that, but then the trade-off was he was supposed to be a really good creator and defensive player, and he wasn't either of those things for the Huskers. So it just
No.
At the end of the day, it got to the point where like they replaced him with Sam Hoiberg in the lineup, because at least Sam could play defense and hit some open shots, because that's the other thing about Raleigh, is he's not a floor spacer. So it's like, if you're not creating shots, you don't space the floor, and you're not defending, I mean, you don't bring much to the table. So so they need to do a bit. They need to hit on point guard. They hit on Sam Griesel. Ulis was a bust, and not just because of the gambling thing, he didn't play well. And so I think they need to find some type of big that can complement Rink. And and Andrew Morgan, like, if we could just have Andrew Morgan for a second year in a row, like, that'd be perfect. But it is what it is. It would be nice to have another guy that could shoot and could space the floor a bit, because Nebraska just did not have that pick and pop game that was a critical part of their offense the past 2 years. And how many threes did Rink get off of that last year? He was able to pop out and then kind of create something. So
Rink Casey, the way he moved without the basketball, and he was able to just find a spot and shoot.
Yeah, and then if you could get a point guard who, when teams play drop coverage, can hit that mid-range jump shot. I mean, Nebraska just has not had, even Sam Griesel couldn't really do that. So that would be, I would probably prioritize and value that even over like a playmaking point guard. I'd rather have somebody that they just need somebody who can go get a bucket, especially after, losing Bryce Williams. So you lose your top 2 scorers. You got Nick Janowski there, who I think has a chance to be a dynamic scorer. I think Connor Esigian.
I think he's going to be really good. Yeah. Janowski.
Yeah. And I think Connor Esigian will, I mean, the dude made 73 pointers. He made almost as many 3-pointers as Tominaga did. It's like, it felt like to me that he got blamed for Nebraska's drop in production from 3-point shooting, when really he was one guy. There was like, he essentially replaced Casey, but they also lost Rank Mass and CJ Wilshire and a bunch of other 3-point shooters.
Lawrence. Well,
yeah,
he's not really a 2-point shooter, but I mean, he was a little bit, but
so I mean, but that's kind of where things stand right now. I would keep my eye out on Monday. I think there's going to be some surprise visitors, and also some guys that haven't even entered into the portal yet that Nebraska's probably going to be after. So the next couple of weeks will be really interesting, but I'm still excited about the Crown. I know a lot of people aren't, but I am. And I'm telling you, even though Arizona State is 3 or 4 and 13, whatever the hell they were in their conference, they're still ranked 70th in the Ken Palm. So, there's not an easy game in that tournament. And I think if Nebraska does go to the final, if they could go through and do it, they'd have to probably beat 4 teams ranked in the top 100 of the Ken Palm rankings. So, like, I understand it's not the NCAA tournament, but it's not going to be a walk in the park if they win this thing either.
No, and I think it'll set the stage for guys like Connor and hopefully Berkey and, players that are coming back next year to really build off of something. I know I said that last week, but to be honest with you, I'm one of the ones that's not overly excited about the Crown, but I do think there are some positives to this as well. I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about too is, I think last year when you had Connor coming off the bench, that almost hurt him in terms of getting his rhythm over the course of a game. And I think him starting next year will help him become an even better 3-point shooter, because I liked Connor. He was one of my favorite players on the team this year. But his, 3-pointers in comparison to Casey's 3-pointers almost felt a little bit different, right? Like, I didn't feel like he was the electrifying volume scorer that Tominaga was, but he still produced. And, I feel like him in the starting role next year could yield better results.
Yeah, for sure. I think, he's just a different type of player in the sense that he doesn't, Casey could create his own shot too. And Casey could
Yeah,
also,
that's true.
do a lot of things without the ball. But Connor's a really good player at what he
Yeah.
does. And I think Nebraska just needs to surround him, with more talented players. But you look at a Sejan and Rink Mass, that's not a bad starting spot. And then you just need to build out from there. So, we'll see how it all works out. One thing I did want to say about the Crown and with Fred Hoiberg and everything is that, regardless of what they do in the Crown, this is the first time they've had 3 consecutive non-losing seasons for the first time since 2006 to 2008. So Fred Hoiberg's already done something that Nebraska hasn't done for 17 years. If they win 3 games in the Crown, they'll have back-to-back 20-win seasons for the first time since 1998, 1999. So that'll be the first time in 26 years. And if they win the Crown, it'll be their first postseason tournament championship since 1996, which would be 31 years.
Yeah.
So, or no, 29
No,
years,
29.
excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, bad counting on my
Too early
part.
for math.
But still, I mean, even if they get 3 wins and they get 20 wins in back-to-back seasons, that'd be the first time Nebraska's done that in 26 years. So I understand people were frustrated by this season, but if you take just a step back and look at Nebraska basketball at a whole, Fred Hoiberg's put together one of the best 3-year stretches that this program's had in decades. So maybe, I don't know, just maybe we shouldn't try to run him out of town after like one mediocre season, because he's probably the best coach we've had since Danny Nee. So
Because
let's
I don't know
just,
who's going to recruit better or utilize the transfer portal better with what Nebraska basketball offers. I mean, we talked about the limited budget and things like that. So, although we weren't happy with the results this season, and it hasn't been a pretty, kind of 10-year for Hoiberg overall, I do think things are stepping in the right direction. And I think it's also important to recognize, not to go down this rabbit hole again, but again, the ceiling of Nebraska basketball. I mean, I think Fred is pretty close to leading the program there. And, if he has, like, I don't know, a 15-win season next year, then maybe he start talking about it. But for right now, I don't think it's a worthy debate.
yeah, like I said, if they miss the Big Ten tournament next year, then I think it's time to say, okay, maybe Fred should be on the hot seat. But I don't think that they will. I think they will bounce back next season. I think they're going to bounce back at the Crown, and who knows, man? Maybe they'll win 20 games this year and win 20 games next year. Would not surprise me. I have 100% confidence in Fred Hoiberg. I think that he'll do a better job in the portal this time around, and we'll go from there. But we'll have lots of updates with the transfer portal, with spring football, with everything that's going on with Nebraska. So we'll be back for another episode sometime this week. And as always, guys, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, get into the comment section, and go Big Red.
Go Big Red.